Good evening. This is Redwood Wonk on Access Humboldt. You're either watching us on television channel 12 or listening to us on KZZH or possibly on the Access Humboldt Internet Access YouTube station. We have a lot to talk about today. There's been a lot of news, and I think what we'll start with is something that has not been hitting the news. It is immigration. For the past couple of months, March had like the biggest crowd of immigrants coming to the border, most of them from Central America, possibly in history. I'm not sure of that, but at least in a long time. And, a lot of them were suffering because of the corruption in Central America, because of the two hurricanes that hit Central America, and it's just really not a good place to live. It put Biden on the defensive because one of his promises was that things were going to get better, and he was going to take kids out of cages, but they got inundated with literally thousands of kids. Ended up putting them in cages because one of the other things that Biden's team discovered when they got in there was that Trump had pretty much dismantled the whole immigration system. Everything from offices that hadn't been used in years. They literally walked into offices and found newspapers from 2017 and nothing newer. And so he's had to organize really quickly, put Kamala Harris on it, and apparently has done some pretty amazing things. You had the thousands of kids in these cages, in these places with those same silver blankets, all the same images we'd seen under Trump and under Obama, quite frankly. And even with the mandatory separation policy not in place that Trump had imposed, a bunch of the kids, when the families realized that they weren't going to be able to get in as a family, just sent the kids either over across the border or to the checkpoints, hoping that they would have a better life. I mean, just again, imagine what you have to do to give up hope that you give up your kid, even if you think you're going to be reunified later. Anyway, 88% reduction of kids in Border Patrol custody. They've either moved into the Health and Human Services custody at facilities which are much more humane for kids, or they've been moved and they're trying to shorten the time frame of getting them into sponsored homes or foster care. Sponsored homes are usually relatives of the children. If they can be located, some parents were sending the kids in with contact information for potential relatives, and they've moved them out. It's not a perfect situation. There are still kids in those cages, but I noticed last week, it's what made me had to Google it, was that the Republicans who'd been hammering them on that point, because that was the biggest point. You said you weren't going to have kids in cages. All of a sudden stopped, and I had to Google it, and that's how I found the 88% reduction. I don't know why the mainstream media isn't making a story of this. You would think it's a big thing. Maybe it's because there are so many other things in the news, but I mean, this is good news. Now, granted, everything isn't perfect. Still a bit of a crisis at the border. But he's also this week beginning to reunify families that have been separated under the Trump policy. And we've already seen one. I will expect photo ops of that, because the only way that Biden and the Democrats can prevail on this and maybe get at least some kind of reform through is to really humanize the story. Rather than these waves of non-white people coming to the border, from these what Trump would call S-hole countries, that actually showing people being reunified in Minnesota, in New York, in all these places. He needs to humanize it, and it seems like, but it does sound like, among other things, somehow they pulled it together and really organized it well.
Yeah, I'm glad to see that there's a lot of progress being made there, and a lot of the facts and figures that are coming out, as you indicate, are encouraging, that's for sure. My concern, though, remains this. This problem, this mass of people at the southern border happens every year, especially about this time leading into the warm weather months. And each year we have to react to it. And so what I would love to see is somebody becoming proactive in the U.S. government and helping to fix some of the problems in the countries in Central America and South America, where most of these folks come from, that lead them to leave their own countries with their children and walk all the way to the U.S. border. That's, I think, the thing that needs to be done in the long term. So what I would love to see is some kind of a plan from the Biden administration or maybe the next administration, whatever that's going to be, that would address the root problems that caused this in the first place. Because otherwise, this is going to be an ongoing issue every single spring.
Well, and there are problems there now. Of course, I talked about the hurricanes, possibly, I mean, very intense, some of the most intense hurricanes that have hit Central America, possibly a climate change issue. What do we do about that, right?
Maybe also a construction issue. What about construction codes, better materials, better engineering, and so on? We can help out in those ways.
But also, you've got a real problem of corrupt governments down there. The Salvadoran president is right now trying to fire all of the Supreme Court justices down there. They've apparently got means to do so. Kamala Harris, Vice President Harris, responded to it, saying this is not going to be real good. We will take some action here. And this is a holdover from, again, I've brought this up on past shows, wars that we've stoked for decades, going way back to the 1930s to the 40s, when I forget the senator's name, famously said, Somoza may be a son of a bitch, but he's our son of a bitch. Mm-hmm. I mean, we supported regimes because of our Cold War interest and because we wanted to oppose land reform that would possibly have an impact on imports to us. I mean, Coca-Cola in Guatemala is a really big example, and of course that's where the term "banana republic" came. Was Dole and other United Fruit companies really supporting regimes that would gear these countries towards an export crop rather than local subsistence economies, and of course that may work somewhat well for a while until the price goes down on that sole export crop. We saw it with Chile twice. Chile, when saltpeter could be made synthesized rather than harvested from bird feces. Chile, who had won practically a monopoly in a war with two of its neighboring countries back in the 1800s, all of a sudden in World War I, found themselves without that. They went into a crisis, and then copper became their big export. When the price of that went down, they always got into trouble. So, we have the structure of the world economy, what Emanuel Wallerstein used to refer to as the capitalist world economy, where it's basically set up that these economies are export, that we don't want them to be diverse because that makes them less willing to export at the prices that we want. And, and so we've got these, we got huge problems, and that is tied to our immigration policy, obviously.
So what do you think the solution is? Because I still, that's a good explanation. I still, though, maintain that if we, and maybe other countries too, maybe this isn't just us, but until something is done to fix the problem, the root problems of this is going to be an ongoing problem no matter what party holds the White House and Congress. What do you think the solution is?
Well, I don't think there's any single solution. We definitely have to, I mean, people have proposed a kind of Marshall Plan in Central America, for instance, possibly long overdue, but the problem is the corruption in several of those countries, if not all of them, and corruption that we stoked. I mean, that's again, that is a problem. But we do need a global policy, But we can also accept a lot of immigrants into this country. We can be set up to accept them, and we need to look at that. I mean, the border between Mexico and the United States is considered to be the only border between a quote unquote first world country and a third world country. I don't know if that's true. But that is what has been said in the media, and we do have some room here. Our population, our birth rates are down. We can use the immigrants. We've talked about that before too. So we do need a process for it to let them come, but we also do have to address the root causes. All right. Well, immigration, of course, was the big issue that brought Trump to power. It is the galvanizing issue for the right wing, and the right wing, it seems to right now have an iron grip on the Republican Party, particularly the Trump. I mean, it does look like we are calling this segment the GOP Civil War, but the war may be over. Trump may have won, because it looks like the whole party is gearing towards his wants. What do you have to say?
Yeah, I agree. I think this week has been very informational. It has been informative in the sense that the Republican Party this week, and it'll probably be again next week when we'll get the real answer to this. The Republican Party has been forced to choose a path, and they are choosing the path that ties them to Trump's delusion that he won the election. So Kevin McCarthy, the minority leader in the House of Representatives and a Californian, has decided that he will support the removal of Liz Cheney from her leadership position in the Republican Party in the House of Representatives and replace her with someone who is willing to carry the water for Donald Trump and continue to propagate the lie that he won the election. So, and I think to understand this, it's really instructional to parse what Kevin McCarthy said. And here it is. He said that Liz Cheney is not the best policy messenger for his party in leadership. And here's the thing. Liz Cheney is about as consistently conservative as anybody in Washington, has been her whole life, and has been involved in Republican politics and conservative movements her whole life. Liz Cheney, though, is choosing honesty and the truth and wanting to move forward with regard to public policy in Republican politics. Kevin McCarthy is rejecting that and siding with a gigantic lie that is provably a lie. So that's the choice they're making. And I think that this is actually a beginning of something. This is not the end of the career of Liz Cheney, and it's not the end of Republicans as we have known them in the past. This is the beginning of something, because this is exactly the decision that observers and analysts needed the Republican Party to make, to see which path they were going to choose, because they've had this choice since last November. And they have stuck with Trump the whole way. And now here we go. This is decision time. They've made their choice. I think what's going to happen is Liz Cheney is going to become a political martyr, and there are going to be other people who eventually do come to her defense and her side. So you may see, although there are very few people now publicly with her, we know that there are a lot behind the scenes. So I think you're going to see the Liz Cheney wing of the Republican Party begin to grow very soon.
Well, that would be interesting. I mean, we also have Mitt Romney being booed at the conservative meeting in Utah. I'm wondering if there might be one or two who finally decide they've had enough and switch parties. Now, Liz Cheney is not in a position to do that. She's very right wing. Right. She's very conservative. We know, her father supported an aggressive military foreign policy. And we know that she's along those lines. Hasn't bent on anything else. And Whereas I think a lot of moderates like Susan Collins and Romney have decided that they spent their political capital on their impeachment vote. Liz Cheney, I think it's legitimate. She's not going to vote moderate because she's not a moderate. But Romney, when he was governor of Massachusetts, he was practically a Democrat. He was pro-choice. He was, he came up with Obamacare, right? But when it was Romney Care, granted that the whole thing came from the Heritage Foundation, which is a right of center think tank, but as an alternative to social medicine. But I'm wondering if, Collins doesn't have to. She just won re-election. Murkowski is probably better off not doing it, because what she'll do is run as an independent and then decide who to caucus for. But I'm wondering if there's going to be a point where two of these, and Romney might be the one. He just got booed. Go for broke, switch parties in a state, Utah, which is still pretty red, but is getting a little bit bluer every year with Latinos moving in.
Yeah, you raised a good point, and it's one that's there's a lot being written about this right now. Yeah, it doesn't make sense for Liz Cheney to become a Democrat. There's really no home for her in the Democratic Party, nor is there a home for Mitt Romney in the Democratic Party, the way the party exists right now. So I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think what's going to happen, given the allowance of big money into politics right now, I think what's going to happen is that the Liz Cheney, Mitt Romney, Adam Kinzinger wing of the Republican Party is going to get some backing from political money that is interested in getting things done and not perpetuating a lie that they know is not sustainable, and trying to save the party that way. The reason I bring that up is because heretofore, and when I say heretofore, I mean until recent rulings that have allowed a lot more money into politics, that would be impossible to pull off. But there is enough money out there now that somebody like Liz Cheney, with the national profile she has, along with Mitt Romney, could raise enough money to make a stand against this Trump wing of the Republican Party. And I think that that's exactly what she's scheming to do right now. I think that that's the plan. And I think you're going to see some announcements very soon, probably early next week, because that's likely when Cheney is going to be replaced by Elise Stefanik, who, by the way, voted for Trump less often than Liz Cheney, which is more proof that this is not about policy. It's all about propping up the fragile ego of Donald Trump.
Right. Well, Donald Trump and Trumpism aren't even classical. It's not even a classical ideology. If it is an ideology, it's nationalist. But it's not conservative. I mean, as we've talked about, he actually kind of attacked Hillary Clinton from the left on some issues pertaining to economics and class and the elite. And Liz Cheney is definitely not in that. Liz Cheney is for the free trade agreements, a complete conservative. I respect her position that she's taking. She's taking a lot of chances. This could be the end of her career if she doesn't thread the needle. But I certainly would never vote for her. I mean, I'd not support her. And so we need to keep that in mind. But I do know that basically McCarthy has put it that you either peddle the big lie with the rest of us about the election or you're out. Right. And she doubled down. She came out and said, no, it's a lie. And we'll see how many Republicans stick with that, because yes, this Trump spell over the party can't last forever. And the Trump people, a lot of the voters who came out in both elections, and remember, he got more votes this last election than he did in 2016. If he's not on the ballot, they don't come out. They didn't come out in 2018. They may not come out in 2022. And if by some chance the Republicans lose ground in either the House or the Senate or both, in one where historically they should be gaining ground, that will probably be Cheney's moment, where she comes and says, we need to see what's happening to us. We need to free ourselves from it.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And think about this as well. One of the groups that the Republicans need electorally are educated women. Educated women. So what the Republican Party is doing right now, they are ousting a well-educated, well-spoken, smart, policy-oriented woman in favor of propping up Donald Trump's lie. That is not going to sell well in the suburbs where the Republicans are already hurting. So this is a gigantic mistake on the part of the Republican Party. And I think that we're going to see that play out over the next 4 to 5 years.
I, Richard Billhouse Nixon, do solemnly swear.
I, Gerald R. Ford, do solemnly swear.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, William Jefferson Clinton, do solemnly swear.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear. So help me God.
Next phase, well, Facebook, everybody's been waiting for their decision. And, well, like a committee, they didn't really decide anything, in my view. I think it was one of the wimpiest things I've seen. I expected them to recommend. What we did see was that they did acknowledge that Facebook and the other social media were right to remove him while he could still be a dangerous influence in a volatile situation in January and perhaps even February. And so I expected them to say, well, either the danger is over, so give him his account back, or the danger will be over, soon, or maybe the danger will never be over, and so maybe, like Twitter, we should permanently suspend him. None of that came out. Basically, it was, well, you need to consider it, and you need to decide what you're going to do and do it. I'm like, okay, you've got a committee that's basically advising something that it refused to do. They had the information right there in front of them, all of the information provided about what potential dangers Trump can if he or what potential liability they could get Facebook into if they allowed Trump to do certain things, and they punted. As far as I'm concerned, it was I'm sorry, it was one of the weakest things. I expected a little bit. I didn't expect like a real firm thing, and they of course aren't a deciding body, they're an advisory body. I expected some advice, and they gave nothing.
Yeah, I almost thought that it was going to be a very simple statement from them that Facebook is a private company. You have terms of service and terms of usage that were clearly violated by Donald Trump or whoever it was who was using his account in some cases, and therefore he should be booted off the platform. I mean, it's a private company, right? And they have rules and regulations. He violated them.
But they are worried because there is talks about, controlling them the same way they control the airwaves and the rest. But it's a little bit of a different legal situation there. The airwaves, the original Corporation for Public Broadcasting, was created to manage it because it was public domain, which created the technology. It was actually, although there was a few companies involved, it was a public project. So the airwaves were in our public domain. Is the internet? No, that's a big question, and that has to be dealt with. But they are worried because there are Republicans who are talking about wanting to regulate it like it's a utility or something under the guidelines of the FCC. And for a long time, Democrats have been willing to do something like that. So they have to be a little bit worried that there are Republicans who will do it just for the result thing. They slighted Trump, so they need to pay. And Trump, of course, went on a rant today about how they're embarrassing to America and all that. Possibly ally with some Democrats who say, we don't like monopolies and we don't want, corporations to be deciding what we get to say and hear and the rest. So they may be a little bit worried about that. And that might have guided their wimpiness today.
Well, how does this play into the whole issue that we have here of this divided society where everyone is in their own informational silos? And, if they break up Facebook, for example, but does that really solve the problem? Or do people just remain in their own silos in something called something other than Facebook at that point. I mean, how does that help politics catch up with technology, which I think is the root problem here? Technology is so far ahead of our politics that politics is just not ready to deal with this problem.
Well, and you cannot have a campaign even locally without an effective social media strategy. You've got to have it. In fact, you brought in money coming in. One of the things is in recent years, money has not been as determinative a factor as it has in the past, because what does money do? The primary thing is to buy television and radio commercials. But if people aren't watching radio and listening to radio or watching television, what good does that do? And it takes a lot less money to be on the internet. You buy ads on YouTube, but who even watches them? You have the option of clicking 4 seconds for most of them, and not having to listen to them. And even when you're forced every once in a while to listen to the whole thing, you're not really paying attention. You're waiting for your video. It's not the same thing as television. So they don't know how to handle this. It's the social media strategy is how stuff gets spread around, getting people to retweet you, to reproduce the stuff that you put around, to spread it around. That's why they don't like the fact checking. And I don't think the idea would be to break up Facebook. I think they would actually want if there was a regulatory scheme, they would want to keep actually the big guys and just basically say, these are the rules by which you play by, or we're going to seize your domain by eminent domain. It will be, and so it may happen at a certain point, because it's not just Trump. I mean, the social media played a big role in January 6th. And that's something that can't be explained. It's what got people there, and not Facebook per se. It was on some of the other, 4chan, 8chan, and some of the nuttier formats. But it did happen on Facebook, and then you had Parler, which got shut down because it was breaking the guidelines, the Amazon guidelines or whatever. But they don't want to be regulated, and that's why they're doing this and trying to come out with these decisions. I just think that the decision they made today made nobody happy. Everybody is unhappy with them, regardless, because it didn't say anything. It was a long-awaited nothing. Yes, they said that it was appropriate for them to take him off during a volatile point, when there was potential violence involved, but we all knew that, so it's they've got a problem, and we have to decide how do we want to treat it. I mean, the internet was created primarily by public funds. They wouldn't have their domains there if we hadn't put it together. Started as a military project, as we know. So as to what will happen in the long run and what should happen, I don't know. It's out of my area of expertise for sure. But we do know that social media has played a huge role in both the last presidential elections, not to mention local elections. And Biden played it better than Clinton. Trump played it the same way and was predictable, and it didn't do any good, especially when they started putting fact checks up. And that's why they angrily respond to fact checks. Fact checking is censorship. The fact checkers don't actually check facts. They're biased. I mean, and I hear that from right-wingers I know. Fact-checking bad, period. Doesn't matter. It's none of your business doing that, and you're taking away the power of the message, therefore you're censoring. It's like, you're not entitled to the power of your message. You're entitled to speak your piece and the content. There's no guarantees that, it's going to come out the way you want it to and not be contradicted. And so if you've got, and so there may be guidelines about that. There could be an official body that looks at it and says, no, this is false. We're not going to take it off, but we're going to put this right under there so that anybody who wants to know what's going on will click it. And if we've made a mistake, well, contact us and we'll review it. But, so.
Yeah, I want to go back to something you said. You mentioned eminent domain. And the only thing that worries me about that is that I could envision a scenario unfolding into the future where a Republican administration takes down some site that they don't like, and then when a Democratic administration comes in, they take down another site, and it just continues that way indefinitely. We're going to have to figure out a way to have a fact-based national discussion again. And it's going to have to incorporate social media, because that's where a lot of the discussion happens right now. It's just that it's in two different silos or more.
They should probably have the power to just take things down randomly unless there's a threat of violence. They should have the power to fact check, and certainly different regimes will fact check differently. But as going back to the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, if you ever remember Deep Thought, the computer was going to come up with the answer to life, the universe, and anything. And Philosophers Local 102 came in, demanded to be shut off because it was taking away their work, and the machine came up with a solution, said, well, no matter what I say, you're going to debate it and discuss it and dispute it anyway, right? So fact checking, existing regimes might differ depending on who's in power, but at least there'll be a discussion. At least that people will be exposed to more than one idea, and it forces a discussion.
Today, we celebrate the triumph not of a candidate, but of a cause. The cause of democracy.
We are going to raise issues that, historically have not been raised.
What about the nuclear option, doing away with the filibuster? I can tell you that would be the end of the Senate as it was originally devised.
All of this is possible for America. Who was standing in the way? Mitch McConnell.
Where an insurrection that sought to overturn an election, when that failed, the action moved into state capitals.
Next segment, the pandemic response. Again, this will actually go into our next segment, but we're talking about, what almost universal praise for Joe Biden's response. I mean, he came in, got right into setting up methods of distribution of the vaccine, getting rallying people, coming up with national policy and guidelines, and putting resources into the distribution of the vaccine, getting in people's arms. Was a little slow for a while there, but for instance, my turn, which is what got me vaccinated, I had my second Pfizer shot last week, was based upon federal funding and some organizations. Some of the people that were staffing it actually came from out of state, I think Georgia actually, and so he has done really well. An interesting point, California right now has the lowest rate of infections. And we can talk about why, but I think it has to do with the fact that we are not rushing back into reopening quite as quickly as some, and still maintaining some guidelines of mask wearing and social distancing. But things are looking really good, except for in a few states. It's getting worse in a couple states. Michigan has its problems. Florida has its problems. And we can talk. We probably could dedicate a segment about that. But I think DeSantis, the governor there, is thinking long term that people won't remember that more people died because he rushed the state open and the rest. But the response has been really good. I believe we have a third of the United States population has been fully vaccinated, about half with at least one shot, which provides 80% protection. That's alone. It's slowing down. The main reason is because he's now going to reorient. That's what he was talking about yesterday, reorienting the policy, the policy to a more rural-based one, because it's the rural areas which are not getting vaccinated as much. There is what the media is calling vaccine hesitancy. I think that's a really, silly term for it. It should be, vaccine ignorance. I'm sorry. I mean, people are dying because of this, and the rest. But resistance, particularly, I'm sorry, in Trump communities, and how we're going to deal with that, how we're going to convince people that the vaccines are, not more dangerous risk than taking a chance of getting COVID, and may save other people's lives if you get vaccinated. And so it's gone really well. The question is it might get harder from here on in as there's actual resistance to it and trying to figure out a way to make it more convenient. They're talking about closing down the mass centers. They've done really well to get into the marginalized urban communities. I mean, California has done really well vaccinating in communities of color, but they're getting resistance there too. The vaccine hesitancy is the main issue. Biden exceeded by far his 100 days goal of getting vaccinations. It's one of the fastest vaccination campaigns ever. But it's going to slow down. He's hoping that 70% will be vaccinated by July, and the hope is that will provide at least some semblance of herd immunity. But again, the hesitancy, the resistance is going to be a factor he has to deal with.
Yeah, the 70% figure is an important one. I remember at the beginning of this, when we first started talking about vaccines, some of the scientists were saying 70 to 75% of the population needed to be vaccinated for us to consider that we're close to herd immunity. So I think we will get there. Now, as far as vaccine hesitancy and the variants go, one thing I've been encouraged with over this past couple of weeks at least are a lot of the scientists are talking about booster shots going into the future. For example, you said that you've already had 2 doses of Pfizer. I get my second dose of Moderna tomorrow. We're recording this on a Wednesday, and I'm scheduled for a Thursday appointment. So I'll have finished the Moderna regime. So that'll be good. But what a lot of scientists are saying is the way to deal with the variants and the vaccine hesitancy is to encourage people and to study the efficacy of boosters. And we don't know how far into the future. In other words, if I get my Moderna shot tomorrow and I'm done with that, would it be 3 months, 6 months? Would it be a yearly thing? 2 years? What would it be? We don't know. But I think that's the direction the science is moving in, because they see that these variants are going to continue to present themselves. So something's going to have to be dealt with along those lines, in addition to the vaccine hesitancy for those who are deciding not to be vaccinated. So I think one of the solutions is going to be booster shots, but we don't know how often that's going to be necessary.
Well, and there was an experiment that I'm forgetting which company released today, but they did have a blind study of people using the current either Moderna or Pfizer vaccine, and one that was more quote unquote strategically aimed at the variants that have been seen in South Africa and Brazil. And sure enough, the protection was better against those particular variants with the strategized vaccine, as they're calling it. But there was still a lot of protection from the standard vaccines. It still keeps you out of the hospital and possibly even keeps you from getting it. But we have had people who were fully vaccinated, including one in Humboldt County. The whole incident written up about in local media, including Los Coast Outpost, about this Pentecostalist youth event where 1,500 people showed up, and it caused a little bit of a glitch here, and somebody who had been fully vaccinated was infected. I don't know how badly it affected him or anything like that, but what definitely did a positive test and had to isolate. So we have all of that, but definitely there may have to be some type of booster about that eventually. But it's but that's going to tell people, a lot of people, well, what good is it if he got sick from it? What good is the vaccine? I'll just get one of those, things. And so we got to get over the fact that there's people out there that believe that this is the deep state putting tracking devices and microchips in. I mean, and you laugh about it, but there are people who believe it, and there are enough that's an issue. And then there are even doctors who don't want to take it, and they're mostly in the rural areas, and so it's just got to be worked on. We're hoping, the hope is, and Biden discussed this yesterday, is that the farther we go without major effects other than the one that Johnson & Johnson did, and that turned out to be not a whole big deal on the same scale. You're taking much more risk by not taking it than you do by taking it. And the longer it goes, the more people will feel, okay, well, nothing's happening to them, so nothing will happen to me. But then there's still people out there saying that that there is it might be years from now before the RNA, consequences show up, and you just can't. There's nothing you can do about that.
Yeah, one last thing on that, to go back to what you said originally, I do think the Biden administration deserves a lot of credit for coming into office, at least with a plan that they were able to execute and get this going, because it was just not being done in the previous administration.
Which brings us to the next segment, Biden, and Tim Scott. And we'll talk a little bit about it. It all began, of course, our last show was being recorded during the Biden speech. I've had a little bit of opportunity to catch up. It was really well done. He is going bold. We've talked about this before. He is not, he's definitely learned. I mean, he learned from Hillary Clinton's campaign errors. He has now learned from Obama's errors. We'll talk to the Republicans, but we're not going to let it drag on. You'll either make some serious proposals, or we're just going to move forward without you, because apparently the parliamentarian is saying you could possibly use reconciliation more than twice a year. And therefore, this is your opportunity. Talk to us or not. And of course, Mitch McConnell has already said, no, we're not going to vote for anything. We're not going to offer anything, for infrastructure, bridges and roads. That's what infrastructure is, nothing else, And, that's where we're at. But he's presented well. That speech was really well taken. I saw him at the press conference yesterday about changes in policy for the pandemic. Presented really well, then took questions, and like when one person was interrupting, it wasn't like Trump where he was yelling at him. It was he said, "Excuse me, ma'am, I'll get to you, but let me finish." And she actually apologized. I mean, I was really amazed at how on the feet it was. He talked softly, and it's kind of a reminder of what was it, Woodrow Wilson's line: "Speak softly and carry a big stick." He's, he is presenting himself. And contrary to the stuff about him not taking questions from reporters, he seems to be doing it all the time.
Yeah.
Teddy Roosevelt, sorry.
Pardon me? Oh,
it was Teddy Roosevelt who said, "Speak softly, carry a big stick," not Woodrow Wilson.
Well, I agree that I like Biden's tone, and I agree he's going bold. And, when months ago, you and I were talking about this, we said that we hope that given the political landscape, he just goes for it, because he's not going to get a lot of Republican support. And I saw that that talk that you referenced, that Mitch McConnell, where Mitch McConnell said there are going to be 0 votes. He was giving a talk at the University of Louisville in Kentucky, and he did say there will be 0 votes for any of this, because infrastructure, as you said, is roads and bridges. And it would have been a terrific talk in 1955. But we're in 2021, where there's a lot more to infrastructure than roads and bridges. And Biden and his administration recognize that, and they're going for it. And I think they should. And the Republicans have had a lot of chances to get on board with this and to get something done on this, and they're just choosing not to. And let them make that choice. That's their choice. Right. And yeah, if the Democrats can use reconciliation to get the infrastructure bill through, great, do it. And then do something about the filibuster so you can get more done with the 50 plus Kamala Harris vote to get more done. Go at it that way. I'm all for it.
Well, and they're also talking about using reconciliation to jack up the taxes of people earning over $400,000. And you can't argue that that's not budget related. That's like directly budget related. So, and
Biden makes the point that that's part of his answer to how are you going to pay for this? He said more than once, and I hope a lot of Republicans have heard this, is that he's not just introducing or supporting spending legislation only. There are ways to pay for some of this in some of the fine print in this. And you just mentioned one of them. People over 400,000 maybe should start paying taxes, and that would be a good idea. We're only talking about part of a slice of the 1%. So, I think it's necessary legislation. It's long overdue, and I'm glad he's going bold on this.
And he's actually earned the respect of some people on the left. Cornel West came out with an amazing comments. He said, Joe Biden is braver than Obama with regard to addressing the systemic racism in the country. And I mean, for him to turn around, because Cornel West had given up on the Democratic Party pretty much. I mean, he supported Bernie, but that was about it. Just a couple of months ago, he was all over the case. And he probably will be very critical again in the future. But when you have earned Cornel West's respect as a centrist politician, and maybe it's again like Franklin Roosevelt, who came to office as a fiscal conservative on a fiscal conservative policy, but reality forced him to the left, basically, and reality is forcing Biden. He wants this to be his legacy, as he said in his speech. This is a once in a generation investment that we're making, and he's talking trillions of dollars. Yes, it's a lot of money to be spent. Yes, it might heat up the economy, but that's why we have a Federal Reserve, right? And yes, it is going to be difficult to get through. And yes, Republicans are going to vote against it, but it's bipartisan in the sense that what I'm proposing has got about 70% support. A lot of those have to be Republicans, right? So it's just and he's revitalized the idea of big government, that big government can actually do something good, especially if it's a mobilizing force. I mean, what he did with the vaccine spreading, it wasn't just throwing money at it. He organized and mobilized people. It's your 1,000 points of light that a former presidential candidate talked about. He used private organizations, profit and nonprofit, to coordinate it. I mean, it's, I expected to be slamming him by now, and there's a few things I'm not happy about. I wish he would take a little bit, going back to immigration. One other thing he's done is increased the number of asylum seekers that will take refugees up to 65,000, by like about 5 times that amount. I think it needs to be higher, but that's a whole other issue. I wish he would attack the military-industrial complex, because he proposed, his budget actually has a minor hike in that. We've got a lot of bloated stuff in the budget. We've had over the past 20 years, incidents where the Pentagon has said, we don't need this thing, but whatever congressional representative was has the factory that makes that thing, wants it to be in the budget, despite the fact the Pentagon says we don't need it. We need to address that. But it's been just over 100 days. I mean, so that would have to come next, to attack the military-industrial complex. But he may do it. I mean, he might. He's taking positions different from what he has in the past. So,
I think on the Cornel West thing, I saw some of the comments that he made, just as you did, and have read some of the things he's written about it. My take on that is that I think Biden has earned Cornel West's respect and support on what he's doing. Primarily because what the Biden administration is proving once again and allowing us to relearn is that there is a place for government. There are things that government can be good at doing, and it is necessary in a country this large and in a society this complex. Cornel West has been talking about these types of things for a long, long time, and questioning people who have always said, oh, well, the market will take care of that, or, don't worry about that, it'll get fixed when the market thinks it needs to be fixed.
Right.
And instead, Biden is being proactive and saying, here's what we need to do, and here's how we can do it. And I think that's what got Cornel West's attention.
All right. It's not just him. It's Mother Jones. I mean, other people. But
on the left. Yeah.
We do want to bring in Tim Scott. He was invited by the Republicans to give the response to the joint session of Congress speech. It was not a State of the Union, but very similar to it. There were a lot of takeaways that he discussed, but the big one that's hit the media was him saying, I have been pulled over for no reason just because I was black. However, America is not a racist nation. Something that Kamala Harris actually repeated yesterday. So isn't a contradiction to say America is not a racist nation, but it suffers from systemic racism. It'll be interesting to see how Tim Scott responds to that. Of course, he is the only black GOP senator in the country right now in office. Chuck?
Well, I think Tim Scott has his eye on higher office, and I think he knows that in order to get to where his ambition wants him to go, he's going to need the help of the Republican Party. And I think he was trying to thread a needle with that response, and trying to give himself more of a national profile, yet not get himself pushed to the side of the Republican Party. But with regard to the issue itself, I would have to defer to people like Kamala Harris, who has a compelling story to tell. But I think what Tim Scott was doing was more political commentary rather than social commentary.
Okay, well, that takes us to our predictions. Chuck?
Well, I have two quick predictions here. We've kind of talked about them already, but I'm going to stick with them. Elise Stefanik, she's a congresswoman from upstate New York, just north of Albany, all the way up to the Canadian border and across from Burlington, Vermont, along Lake Champlain. I think she is going to take Liz Cheney's job in Republican leadership, probably next Tuesday or Wednesday. And then the second prediction follows on that. I think Liz Cheney is going to use this to build upon, and she's going to build either her own caucus or maybe even her own new party. We'll see. But I think that the prediction is that this is a beginning of something, not the end of Liz Cheney.
Okay, Newsmax issued an apology to Dominion. Dominion has sued them and others, big, 1.6 billion, all that kind of stuff. Newsmax actually said we were just reporting on Trump, but we didn't fact check it, and there appears to be no basis for Dominion having, acted unethically with regard to the election. I think that's a prelude to a settlement offer that they may make because, Fox could possibly survive a $1.6 billion judgment, possibly, but Newsmax nor OAN can. I'm wondering if OAN will follow suit and Newsmax and OAN basically settle out and leave Fox hanging to dry. Fox is the main culprit anyway. Secondly, the Derek Chauvin trial, one of the jurors, African-American guy, has said a lot in the media. Turns out he attended a commemoration last summer to the 1963 I Have a Dream speech march on Washington. Not a BLM event and not anything that pertained to the police brutality, although it probably came up. But he had said that he hadn't attended any police brutality demonstrations. And so the question is whether or not they're going to evaluate whether or not he lied or didn't tell the truth on it. I don't think it's going to go anywhere because he had admitted in voir dire to the defense attorneys that he looks favorably on Black Lives Matter, but that he could remain neutral. He said that. They knew it. So unless he lied about having attended a BLM demonstration as opposed to that commemoration, I don't think it's going to fly. Okay, well, that takes us, next time we're hoping to actually try something a little different, but I want to shore things up. We may have a guest, a third guest, to actually freshen the discussion up a bit, but you've been watching Redwood Wonk on Access Humboldt, and until next time, keep thinking.